Revenge office stories. It's a special kind of humiliation to be told your opinion doesn't matter, to be patted on the head in a room full of powerful men and dismissed as little more than a secretary. But it's a special kind of satisfaction when you know the very document they've told you to tidy up contains a quiet little time bomb you created. My CFO, a man who wore his arrogance like a badge of honor, once told me to leave the strategic thinking to the men. Little did he know, my revenge wasn't about arguing back. It was in a single sentence I had buried in a contract months ago. And in this meeting, I was about to watch that sentence cost him not just his pride, but millions. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about the devastating cost of arrogance and the quiet power of the one person who actually reads the fine print. I was the one they underestimated, the one they silenced. And I was the only one who knew that the multi-million-dollar project our CFO was about to launch was already dead on arrival. He just hadn't read the obituary yet. I wrote it. Have you ever had a boss who just refused to listen? Let me know in the comments, because I have a feeling this story might resonate. And if you're a fan of seeing karmic justice served cold, hit that subscribe button, because you won't want to miss the fallout. For the better part of a decade, my world was gray carpets, glass-walled offices, and the quiet hum of servers. I was the senior risk and compliance analyst for a fast-growing fintech company called Innovate Financial. My job wasn't glamorous. I didn't close big deals or get my face in magazines. My job was to live in the shadows of those deals, to crawl through the legal jungle of contracts and find the snakes hiding in the weeds. I was paid to ask, but what if it all goes wrong? And I was very, very good at my job. While the sales team popped champagne, I was the one awake at 2 a.m., flagging a vaguely worded clause that could expose us to unlimited liability. I was the silent guardian, the watchful protector. My successes were invisible. They were the disasters that never happened. The culture at Innovate was a predictable mix of new money tech arrogance and old-school corporate machismo. It was a place where confidence was currency, and being loud was often mistaken for being valuable. As a woman in a senior analytical role, I was an anomaly. I was respected for my skills, like you'd respect a useful piece of software, but I was rarely seen as a strategic peer. My domain was the fine print, not the big picture. That, I was told time and again, was a world reserved for them. No one embodied this more than our CFO, Richard Sterling. Richard was, to put it simply, a caricature of a powerful man, tall, impeccably dressed, with a booming voice and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. To Richard, people were either useful to his career or they were obstacles. With my cautious warnings and highlighted risk reports, I was firmly an obstacle. He treated my work as a bureaucratic hoop to jump through. He'd glance at my reports and say things like, "All right, Anna, I see the red flags. Just make them go away," as if complex legal risks were minor annoyances. He never engaged with the substance of my concerns. The details were my problem. His job was the what, the glorious visionary what. His latest what was a project he'd personally christened Odyssey. It was a massive $250 million global expansion, designed to launch our platform in 12 new countries at once. Odyssey was Richard's baby, his legacy project. His reputation and his bonus were all staked on its success. Because of the project scale, I was assigned to it full-time. My life became a blur of international contract law and due diligence reports. Each of the 12 countries had its own unique legal framework. My job was to create a master partnership agreement that would protect our company no matter where we operated. I worked tirelessly, identifying hundreds of risks. But the biggest one, the one that kept me up at night, was partner quality. To meet Richard's insane timeline, the business development team was rushing to sign on local partners. Based on the due diligence reports I was seeing, some of these companies had questionable operating histories, and others lacked the infrastructure to support our platform securely. We were moving way too fast. I flagged this as a code red risk. My recommendation was clear: slow down. We needed a mandatory certification program for all partners before we integrated their systems and sent them a single dollar. It would delay the launch by 6 months, but it would ensure our foundation was solid. A weak link in any one country could trigger a cascade of failures that could cripple the company's reputation. The stage for my public execution was the main boardroom on the 40th floor. I was the only woman at the monolithic marble table, surrounded by Richard and his VPs. When it was my turn, I calmly presented my findings, focusing on the critical risk of partner unpreparedness. A failure in one market will cascade, I explained. The reputational damage alone could jeopardize everything. My recommendation is a phased rollout, contingent on each partner passing a Genesis-level certification. Silence. Richard, who had been leaning back looking bored, slowly leaned forward. "Anna," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Thank you for that very thorough presentation. The level of detail is impressive." He turned detail into an insult. He looked at the other men at the table. "But I think we need to remember our roles here. We are the architects of the future. Anna's job," he said, gesturing dismissively at me, "is to manage the paperwork, to tidy up the details." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just disagreeing, he was belittling my entire profession in front of everyone. A 6-month delay? For a certification program? He scoffed. "We are not here to hold hands and run a training school, Anna. We are here to conquer markets." Then he delivered the final blow. He looked right at me and said, "Why don't you leave the strategic thinking to the men, Anna? Just go make sure the paperwork is tidy for the launch." The room was suffocatingly silent. A few VPs shifted in their seats, but no one said a word. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me, the heat rising in my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to throw my painstakingly researched report right in his smug face, but I didn't. I held his gaze. My anger crystallized into something cold and patient. The desire to protect the company died in that moment. A new resolve was born. He wanted me to just tidy up the paperwork? Fine. I would tidy it up so perfectly that he would choke on it. I took a slow breath. "Understood, Richard," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "I will prepare the master agreement as instructed. Leave the strategic thinking to the men." The phrase echoed in my head. He hadn't just dismissed my analysis. He'd dismissed my intelligence. He drew a line in the sand. He was the strategist. I was the clerk. Back in my office, my anger cooled into a clear, sharp focus. Hot revenge, screaming, quitting, sending a company-wide email was loud, messy, and would only brand me as emotional, proving his point. No, the best revenge would be quiet, clinical, and executed with the very tools he mocked: details and paperwork. He wanted me to finalize the master partnership agreement, and he wanted it fast. He had publicly handed me the weapon and told me to polish it. He just didn't realize I was also an expert in how to aim it. For 2 weeks, I lived inside that 200-page document. I worked with the company's expensive external lawyers. They were good, but they were focused on protecting the company from lawsuits, not from its own internal stupidity. They didn't understand the business on the ground. I did. My opportunity came in Section 11, Funding and Project Milestones. This section detailed when we'd pay our new partners. Richard was obsessed with it, and that's where I laid my trap. Fueled by coffee and righteous fury, I crafted a single, innocuous-looking sentence. I buried it deep within subsection 11.4, a dense paragraph about final compliance checks. To a casual reader, it would look like just another piece of bureaucratic fluff. The sentence read, *final disbursement of Phase 2 funding, amounting to the sum stipulated in Appendix C, is contractually contingent upon a unanimous, recorded vote of approval from Innovate Financial's full Internal Risk and Compliance Committee, hereafter referred to as IRCC. confirming that all regional partners have successfully met the predefined Genesis quality assurance standard in their pre-launch audit. Asterisk. It was a work of art. Here's why it was so devastatingly perfect. First, the Internal Risk and Compliance Committee, IRCC. On paper, it was a minor entity that met once a quarter to rubber stamp paperwork. What Richard had forgotten, or never bothered to learn, was that I had been appointed its chairperson 18 months prior. The committee had 3 people, me, a junior analyst from my team, and a mid-level IT manager who owed me a favor. A unanimous vote meant I held absolute veto power. Second, the Genesis Quality Assurance Standard. This was the very certification program Richard had publicly mocked. After that meeting, I had formalized my risk report into an official internal document, named it the Genesis Standard, and had it quietly ratified by my committee. It was now a binding company standard, even if no one outside my department knew it existed. Third, the crucial link. I knew, with absolute certainty, that the hastily chosen partners would fail. Richard had explicitly refused to fund the hand-holding needed to get them up to speed. I inserted the clause and reread it a dozen times, savoring its elegant brutality. It didn't scream sabotage. It screamed due diligence. It was prudent and responsible. The next day, I sent the draft to the legal team. They reviewed it, but my little sentence didn't raise any flags. Why would it? It looked like a standard internal control designed to protect the company. They approved it. Then I sent it to Richard's office. His assistant emailed me an hour later. Richard has signed off. Please proceed. He hadn't read it. Of course he hadn't. He was a visionary. He didn't have time for details. He saw a 200-page document, saw the green light from legal, and assumed his clerk had tidied up the paperwork. He had no idea I had just signed his professional death warrant with his own pen. The next 8 months were an exercise in supreme self-control. On the outside, I was the model employee, cooperative, efficient, and quiet. I watched as the Odyssey project roared to life, a giant machine gathering speed, completely unaware of the kill switch I'd installed. Richard was in his element, more insufferable than ever. He was featured in a major financial magazine, hailed as a Fintech visionary. He hung a framed copy in his office. He'd see me in the hallway and give me a condescending nod. "Keeping things tidy, Anna?" he'd ask with a smirk. He thought he'd put me in my place. He had no idea he was just twisting the knife in his own back. Meanwhile, I was quietly gathering my ammunition. My team conducted the pre-launch audits, sending our new partners the Genesis Quality Assurance Standard checklist. The results were just what I'd predicted. A disaster. One partner stored customer data on unencrypted servers. Another had no employee background check procedures. For each partner, I created a detailed file documenting every failure. I wasn't building an argument. I was building a fortress of facts. My little 3-person IRCC met every 2 weeks. In these quiet, overlooked meetings, I presented the audit findings. "For the record," I'd say, turning on the recorder, "the committee notes that the partner in question is currently non-compliant with sections 4, 7, and 12 of the Genesis Standard." We documented everything. Every meeting had formal minutes. Every vote was recorded. It was bureaucratic warfare, happening completely under the radar. The tension ramped up as the launch date neared. Phase 2 funding, hundreds of millions of dollars, was on the horizon. Richard scheduled a final go/no-go meeting with the board of directors and key investors. It was meant to be a celebration. The day before the meeting, I bundled all my audit files, meeting minutes, and failed reports into an encrypted digital folder. I wrote a 1-page summary that laid out the stark conclusion. Not a single partner was compliant. Then I scheduled an email to be sent to the CEO, the entire board, and the head of legal. Time to arrive right at the climax of the meeting. I went home that night and slept more soundly than I had in months. The boardroom was packed. the air electric with self-congratulation. The full board was there, plus 2 major investors. Champagne was chilling in silver buckets. Richard was at the head of the table, glowing with triumph. He walked the room through a slick presentation filled with hockey stick growth projections. With the final disbursement of Phase 2 funding, he concluded, we will be launching a new era for Innovate Financial. Applause erupted. The CEO, Marcus Thorne, beamed. Incredible work, Richard. Truly visionary. Marcus then turned to the table. All right, team, let's make it official. We need a formal sign-off from all department heads. Legal. All partner agreements are executed. Legal signs off. Operations. Systems are green. Operations signs off. He went down the line. Marketing, HR, tech. Each gave a confident we sign off. Then Marcus looked down his list. And finally, risk and compliance. Anna. This was it. I let the silence hang for a beat too long. All eyes turned to me. I saw Richard give me a glare that said, just say your line. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I looked directly at the CEO. I'm afraid I cannot sign off, I said, my voice perfectly clear. Risk and compliance votes, no go. The celebratory buzz vanished. It was as if a grenade had rolled onto the table. Richard's face twisted into a mask of fury. What? He barked. What did you just say? I said no go, Richard, I repeated calmly. This is not the time for games, Anna, he hissed, his face turning red. This is a formality. One of the investors leaned forward. Excuse me, she said sharply. I was under the impression this was a unanimous approval. Ms. Anna Morgan, I supplied. And you are correct. It is. And risk cannot, and will not, approve the disbursement. Marcus, the CEO, looked completely bewildered. Anna, on what grounds? All the reports I've seen are positive. That's because you haven't seen the right reports, I said, turning my gaze to Richard. Richard, you'll recall the master partnership agreement you signed 8 months ago? He stared at me blankly. Of course I recall the agreement. Legal drafted it. I signed it. It's solid. It is solid, I agreed. Especially Section 11, subsection 4. I slid a single printed page across the table to our lawyer. He picked it up and began to read aloud. As the words filled the room, asterisk, contingent upon a unanimous recorded vote of approval from Innovate Financial's full internal risk and compliance committee. Asterisk. I watched Richard's face. I could see the gears turning, the frantic search through a memory he never bothered to store. The lawyer continued, confirming that all regional partners have successfully met the predefined Genesis Quality Assurance Standard. At the mention of Genesis Standard, panic flashed in Richard's eyes. He remembered. He remembered me proposing it, and he remembered mocking it. The lawyer finished reading. This clause gives Anna's committee final veto power. The room was deathly quiet. Richard looked like he'd been punched in the gut. And has this audit been conducted? The investor asked, her eyes fixed on me. It has, I said. At that exact moment, I saw the CEO and board members glance down at their buzzing phones. My email had just landed, and as of this morning, not a single one of our 12 partners has met the standard. The documentation of these catastrophic failures has just been delivered to the board's inbox. We are on the verge of wiring millions to a network of high-risk partners. Doing so would be a reckless breach of our fiduciary duty. Chaos. The investors fired questions. Board members frantically scrolled through the files, their faces grim. The CEO was staring at Richard with pure fury. This is sabotage. Richard sputtered. She buried this in the contract. I stayed perfectly still. I looked at the general counsel. Was the clause hidden? Or was it a prudent piece of risk mitigation that any diligent executive should have noticed before committing $250 million of shareholder money? The lawyer could only state the truth. The clause is legally sound and was presented in the final draft for review. Richard was broken. He slumped in his chair, defeated. The conquering hero, brought down by a sentence he couldn't be bothered to read. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a humiliated man staring at the ruins of his legacy, proven incompetent in front of the very people he most wanted to impress. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The Odyssey project was dead. The meeting ended not with champagne, but with frantic talk of damage control. The project was suspended, and the cost of breaking the partner agreements and money already spent led to a write-down of nearly $90 million. The company's stock plummeted over 20% the next day. Richard Sterling was fired for gross negligence. His reputation as a visionary was shattered overnight. He became a cautionary tale, the brilliant CFO taken down by the fine print. I heard he couldn't find another executive position. And me? I was called into a meeting with the board. They looked at me with a newfound respect. There was no more condescension. They offered me a promotion, Vice President of Global Risk Management, a massive pay rise, a seat at the big table. They wanted the mind they had dismissed to be a core part of their team. 8 months earlier, I would have jumped at it. But sitting there, I realized I didn't want to be part of their world anymore. I had proven my point, but the fight had changed me. I was no longer interested in protecting a culture that required me to plant a contractual bomb just to be heard. So, I politely declined their offer. Instead, I resigned. My contract had a very generous severance clause. I had, of course, reviewed it carefully. I walked away with enough to start my own business. Today, I run a successful risk management consultancy. Our slogan is simple. We read the fine print. My story became a quiet legend at Innovate, a reminder to never, ever underestimate the person in the room who does the reading. Arrogance makes you loud, but intelligence makes you powerful. And sometimes the quietest person at the table is the one holding the detonator. The world is full of Richards, people who think their position puts them above scrutiny. But it's also full of people who believe in the power of diligence and detail. Which one are you? Share your own story about dealing with an arrogant boss in the comments below. I read every one. And if you enjoyed this piece of corporate karma, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Thanks for watching.